"Don't hover, just bring the coffee and stay out of the way." The voice, belonging to a man named Mr. Davies, was a blade in the velvet quiet of the private dining room. It sliced through the hushed clinking of silver on bone china, sharp and without apology. Anissa, the waitress assigned to the room, didn't flinch. Her hands, holding the heavy silver water pitcher, remained steady. Her posture, honed by 2 decades of service in rooms just like this, remained impeccable. She simply paused the arc of her pour, retracted the pitcher with a silent grace, and gave a nod that was barely a dip of her chin. She felt the familiar sting, the hot flash of being erased, of being reduced from a person to a function. Her training, a kind of armor she put on with her uniform each day, kicked in instantly. Become smaller, become smoother, become invisible. It was a survival skill, a form of professional magic. Would you endure this? The question was a ghost in her mind, a whisper she had learned long ago to push down, to bury beneath the immediate tasks of refilling glasses and clearing plates. To acknowledge the question was to let the anger rise, and anger had no place here. Here, in this cathedral of commerce where fortunes were made and lost over seared scallops and aged Bordeaux, emotion was a liability. The room itself seemed designed to suffocate feeling. Paneled in dark, almost black mahogany, it smelled of old leather, beeswax, and the faint, metallic scent of ambition. A single, magnificent chandelier of hand-blown Murano glass hung above the table, its light catching the facets of crystal glasses and the polished gleam of the table's surface. It was a room built for men like Mr. Davies, men who believed the world was a thing to be conquered, carved up, and served to them on a platter. Mr. Davies certainly looked the part of a conqueror. He was a bull of a man, stuffed into a pinstripe suit that seemed a size too small, the fabric straining at his shoulders. His voice boomed, filling the silence that others might have found comfortable. He gestured with his hands, thick fingers adorned with a gold signet ring that caught the light, emphasizing points about market share and quarterly growth with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He was a man who took up space, who consumed the air, who saw silence not as peace but as a vacuum waiting for his voice to fill it. Across from him sat his opposite, the reason for this entire performance, Mr. Tanaka. Where Davies was motion, Tanaka was stillness. An elderly man with a face like a beautifully carved netsuke, he was a study in quiet dignity. His suit was a simple, dark gray, but it hung on his small frame with an elegance that made Davies' expensive tailoring look vulgar. He had said very little, listening intently to Davies' monologue, his hands resting calmly on the table, his teacup held with a delicate precision. Beside him sat a younger aide, his face a mask of polite neutrality, occasionally leaning in to translate a particularly blunt American idiom into something more palatable in Japanese. Anissa retreated towards the heavy, sound-proof door, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the thick Persian rug. Her job was to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to be a ghost who replenished and removed with seamless efficiency. But she was more than a ghost. She was an observer, and she had learned to read rooms, to understand the subtle currents of power that flowed between people. She could see the deal laid bare on the table, not in the glossy binders Davies kept tapping, but in the body language of the two men. Davies leaned forward, an aggressive posture of dominance, his energy a constant forward press. Tanaka leaned back, receptive but not yielding, his stillness a form of gravity, pulling the room into his own quiet orbit. Davies spoke of numbers, of acquisitions, of breaking things apart to maximize value. Tanaka, in his few brief remarks, had spoken of harmony, of legacy, of building something that would last 100 years. They were speaking 2 different languages, and Anissa wasn't talking about English and Japanese. As she reached the door, she risked a final glance back. Davies had launched into another tirade, his voice rising with passion. And that's the bottom line. We move fast, we break the competition, and we win. It's the American way. Mr. Tanaka picked up his teacup. He took a slow, deliberate sip. He didn't look at Davies. Instead, his eyes briefly met Anissa's as she slipped out of the room. It was a look that held no command, no expectation. It was just a glance, a flicker of acknowledgement. But in that fraction of a second, Anissa felt seen. Not as a function, not as a uniform, but as a person who occupied the same quiet space he did, a fellow observer in a room full of noise. She closed the door behind her, the heavy wood sealing the cathedral once more. The sound of Davy's voice was immediately muffled, reduced to a dull, angry thrum. She stood in the silent corridor, the silver pitcher cool against her skin. The ghost in her mind whispered again, a little louder this time. She took a deep, steadying breath, the air sterile and conditioned. The coffee still needed to be made. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, her movements measured, her face a mask of professional calm. The battle inside the room had just begun, but the first casualty, as always, was the quiet dignity of the person paid to be invisible. Anissa returned with the coffee service, the porcelain cups and silver pot arranged on a tray with geometric precision. She moved with an unhurried rhythm that was its own form of defiance against the frantic energy Davies was pumping into the room. She placed a cup beside him, the delicate clink of porcelain on the mahogany table, a whisper in the tense silence that had fallen. Davies, agitated by Tanaka's continued calm, was pacing now, a caged beast in a bespoke suit. As he turned, his arm caught the edge of her tray. It wasn't a hard knock, just a clumsy, careless gesture, but it was enough. The tray tilted, and while the coffee things remained secure, something small and light dislodged from the pocket of her apron. It was a tiny square of paper, folded so many times it looked like a fabric charm, yellowed with the patina of age. It fluttered to the floor and landed by the toe of Davy's gleaming alligator skin shoe. Before Anissa could even bend to retrieve it, Davies scooped it up. "What's this? Dropping love notes," he sneered, his attempt at humor curdling in the strained atmosphere. He was looking for any distraction, any target for the frustration building inside him. He unfolded the paper with his thick, impatient fingers. Inside, 3 lines of elegant, hand-brushed Japanese calligraphy flowed across the page. He squinted, holding it up to the light as if it were a counterfeit bill. "What is this gibberish?" he asked the room at large. He looked at Tanaka's aide. "You read this?" The aide glanced at it and then quickly looked away, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "It is a poem, sir, a haiku." Davies let out a short, barking laugh. "A poem? Our waitress is a poet." He waved the paper dismissively. "Just some scribbles, probably her shopping list in another language." The contempt in his voice was thick and suffocating. He tossed the paper onto the table, where it landed next to a half-eaten bread roll, a piece of trash amidst the fine china. Anissa said nothing. Her face remained a mask of professional neutrality. She walked calmly to the table, picked up the small, precious document, and folded it carefully along its ancient creases. Each fold was a deliberate, reverent motion. She tucked it back into her apron pocket, the gesture as intimate as smoothing a child's hair. Her dignity was a shield, a silent rebuke that was more powerful than any retort. Would you tolerate this kind of humiliation, watching something precious to you treated like garbage? Across the table, Mr. Tanaka watched the entire exchange. His face was unreadable, but his chopsticks, which had been resting motionless beside his plate, were now picked up. He did not eat. He simply held them, his focus entirely on the quiet waitress who had just weathered a storm of disrespect without a single ripple on the surface of her calm. He saw not a servant being put in her place, but a person of immense control, a person who understood the weight of small things. The incident with the poem seemed to be the final straw for Davies. His pretense of negotiation evaporated, replaced by brute force. He sat down heavily, the chair groaning in protest, and pushed a thick, leather-bound contract to the center of the table. The thud it made was a statement of finality. "This is it," he announced, his voice flat and hard. "This is the final offer. It's generous, it's fast, and it's efficient. We've crunched the numbers and they're unbeatable. Sign it and we can all go home rich. Dither on it and the offer walks, by end of day." The air in the room became thin, pressurized. The junior executives on Davies' side held their breath, their eyes darting from their boss to the impassive face of Mr. Tanaka. This was the point of no return. The bridge of diplomacy was being burned, replaced by an ultimatum. Mr. Tanaka didn't touch the document. His gaze was fixed on the space just above it, as if considering not the text but the spirit in which it was offered. He spoke, his voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. His aide translated. "Mr. Davies, a partnership cannot be built on pressure, it must be built on Shingon." Davies rolled his eyes. Shingon. What's that, a new kind of sushi? Tanaka's aide stiffened. It means true words, sir. It speaks to a foundation of deep trust and mutual understanding, a meeting of hearts, not just of balance sheets. A meeting of hearts, Davies scoffed, leaning back and spreading his arms wide. This isn't a monastery, it's a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. Your sentimentality is about to cost your company access to the entire North American market. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping to a low growl. This is the deal of a lifetime. The only thing my heart tells me is to take it. The room was frozen in a tense tableau. The two philosophies were in open warfare, the transactional versus the relational, the immediate versus the eternal. Anissa, standing by the service station, felt the shift. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a collision. The fate of the deal, the factory expansion it was meant to fund, and the hundreds of local jobs that hung in the balance were all caught in this impasse. There was no walking back from this. Davies had locked them into a conflict where one side had to break, and Anissa had a sinking feeling that he had fundamentally misjudged which side had the strength to stand firm. As Anissa moved to clear the now finished main course plates, the tension in the room was a physical presence, as thick as humidity before a storm. Davies was seething, his face flushed. Mr. Tanaka, in contrast, seemed to have retreated into a state of deep contemplation. He looked out the room's large window, which offered a view of a small, manicured Japanese garden with a koi pond. He murmured something to his aide, a quiet, almost melancholic phrase in Japanese. The key words Anissa caught were furu ike. An old pond. Davies, impatient, snapped his fingers. What's he saying now? The young translator, flustered by the pressure, leaned in and whispered to Davies, his voice trembling slightly. He's talking about a stagnant pool, sir. I think he's calling the deal dead. A pool with no life. The interpretation landed like a stone in the room. Davies' face darkened further. Stagnant after the numbers I just showed him. Anissa was stacking plates behind Davies' chair. The translator's error was a small thing, a nuance lost in the rush, but she knew it was fundamentally wrong. It painted Tanaka's reflection as an insult when it was something else entirely. She didn't look up. She didn't stop her work, but as she leaned in to retrieve a plate, she spoke, her voice a low murmur intended for no one and yet for everyone. He didn't say stagnant, she whispered. He said still. Her voice was so quiet it was almost part of the ambient noise of the room, but in the charged silence it was as clear as a bell. A pond waiting for a sign. Did you catch what she just did? It was a moment of breathtaking audacity, wrapped in the guise of service. Davies, deep in his own anger, didn't seem to register it, but Tanaka's head turned slowly from the window. His eyes, ancient and sharp, settled on Anissa. The surprise in them was evident, followed by a flicker of deep curiosity. He had been seen. He had been understood, not by the highly paid translator or the executives, but by the waitress clearing the table. For the first time since the meeting began, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of Mr. Tanaka's lips. The quietest person in the room was, perhaps, the only one who was truly listening. The vulnerable catalyst in the room was not a person, but an idea, the principle of respect that Mr. Tanaka so quietly and steadfastly embodied. In his refusal to be bullied, in his insistence on Shingon, Anissa saw a reflection of a value system she thought had vanished from the world. It was the same system her late husband, Kenji, had lived by. Kenji had been a master of kado, the art of flower arrangement, but he always said he wasn't arranging flowers, he was listening to them. He taught her that the empty space in a vase was as important as the branch it held. He taught her that true strength wasn't in shouting, but in the resilience of a bamboo stalk that bends in the wind but never breaks. He was a man of profound stillness and quiet observation, a man who could find a universe in a single dewdrop on a leaf. It was Kenji who had brushed the calligraphy for the poem she carried. It was his gift to her on their 10th anniversary, a symbol of their life together. He'd explained its meaning, the sudden splash in the ancient, silent pond, as a metaphor for life's most pivotal moments, the instant a quiet understanding changes everything. Watching Mr. Tanaka sit with such unshakable dignity in the face of Davies' storm of aggression, Anissa felt a powerful surge of protectiveness. It was as if she were protecting Kenji's memory, his entire philosophy of life. This wasn't about a business deal anymore. It was about which world would prevail, the loud, empty world of Davies, or the quiet, meaningful world of Tanaka and Kenji. Her connection to this principle was intensely personal, a silent allegiance that strengthened her resolve. She was no longer just a functionary in this room. She was a guardian of a forgotten way of being, a silent witness for the value of stillness in a world obsessed with noise. If you were there, would you step closer or stay silent? With this newfound clarity, Anissa could see the trap of the situation perfectly. It wasn't hidden in the fine print of the contract Davies had slammed on the table. The trap was Davies himself. His entire strategy, the aggressive timeline, the public pressure, the casual disrespect, was designed to create a cage of American corporate warfare. He assumed that, faced with enough force, Tanaka would eventually fold, seeing it as the only logical path. But Davies was fighting the last war. He didn't understand that for a man like Tanaka, the method was the message. Every act of disrespect, from the dismissal of his philosophy to the mockery of Annis's poem, was not a negotiation tactic. It was evidence. It was proof that Davies was not a suitable partner. He was trying to buy a signature, but Tanaka was looking to build a relationship that could last for generations. How could you build a 100-year partnership with a man who had no respect for a 10-second poem? The trap was that Davies believed the only way out was for Tanaka to sign the paper. Anissa saw that the only way forward was to discard the paper entirely and find a different language. The contract was a symptom of the disease, not the cure. The disease was a profound lack of understanding, a clash of civilizations happening in miniature in a hushed, private dining room. The cost of ignoring this, Anissa knew, was not just one failed deal. It was the reinforcement of a world where the loudest, most aggressive voice always wins. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this could not be allowed to stand. Have you ever seen a rule used like a weapon? In this case, the unwritten rules of brute force negotiation were the weapon, and they were aimed at the very heart of what mattered. The lunch meeting finally, mercifully, ended. It didn't conclude, it disintegrated. Mr. Tanaka gave a final, formal bow, his face a polite and impenetrable mask, and left with his aide. No papers were signed. No handshakes were exchanged. The silence he left in his wake was cavernous. Davies exploded. He threw his napkin onto the table, a ball of crumpled linen. This is a complete waste of time. Unbelievable. He spun around, his face a mask of crimson fury, looking for someone to blame. His eyes landed on Anissa, who was standing quietly by the service station. "And you," he snarled, pointing a thick finger at her. "You were a distraction, whispering, dropping things. It's unprofessional." He turned to the restaurant manager who had rushed in, sensing the disaster. "I'm a valued client here. I expect better. I don't want to see her again." The manager, a man whose spine was made of jelly, immediately began to grovel. "Of course, Mr. Davies. My deepest apologies. It will not happen again." He turned to Anissa, his face a mixture of fear and apology. "Anissa, please remain in the kitchen for the remainder of your shift." It was a public banishment, a dismissal. She was being punished for a crime she didn't commit, scapegoated for a failure that was entirely Davies' own making. She nodded once, her composure absolute. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, each step even and deliberate. The door swung shut behind her, a final, definitive sound. She was now isolated, cut off, removed from the very situation she alone seemed to fully comprehend. She leaned against a cold, stainless steel counter, the frantic energy of the kitchen a stark contrast to the icy tension of the dining room. She reached into her apron, her fingers closing around the worn, familiar shape of the folded poem. It felt like the all-is-lost moment. The door was closed. The chance was gone. If that happened to you, what would you do? Would you accept the injustice, or would you find another way? In the sterile quiet of her exile, a quiet vow began to form, a silent promise to the memory of her husband and to the dignified old man who had just walked away. Anissa watched through the small, diamond-shaped window of the swinging kitchen door. She saw Mr. Davies and his team finally leave, their shoulders slumped in defeat. And she saw Mr. Tanaka and his aide reappear in the lobby, waiting for their car. This was it. The last possible moment before they disappeared forever, taking the deal and the hope of those hundreds of jobs with them. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against the calm facade she maintained. Her training screamed at her to stay put, to follow the manager's orders, to protect her job. But a deeper instinct, a voice that sounded remarkably like Kenji's, urged her to act. This is where everything could flip. Her plan wasn't to argue about contracts or talk about business. Her plan was to offer a bridge, a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect, the very thing that had been so conspicuously absent all afternoon. She moved with a sudden, decisive grace. She went to the tea station, bypassing the standard English breakfast and Earl Grey. Her eyes scanned the canisters until she found what she was looking for, a small, unassuming tin of genmaicha. It was a rustic, humble tea of green leaves and toasted brown rice. It wasn't a tea for showing off. It was a tea for comfort, for contemplation. A tea that smelled of the earth. It was a choice full of shingon, of true words. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, brewing the tea to the perfect temperature. She poured it into a simple, elegant cast iron pot and placed it on a small lacquer tray with 2 handleless cups. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the kitchen doors. She was no longer a waitress following orders. She was a woman on a mission, entering the proving ground. She walked directly into the grand, marbled lobby, heading straight for Mr. Tanaka. The restaurant manager saw her and his eyes went wide with panic. He started to move towards her to intercept, to enforce his order. But there was something in Annis's walk, a calm, unshakable purpose, that made him hesitate. She reached Mr. Tanaka just as he was about to turn toward the revolving doors. She stopped a respectful distance away and bowed deeply, not the perfunctory dip of a servant, but a bow of genuine, profound respect. "Tanaka-sama," she said, her voice clear and steady. She spoke in formal Japanese, the words beautiful and precise in the quiet lobby. "Forgive my great interruption." Mr. Tanaka and his aide turned, their faces showing their surprise. "You spoke of a still pond," Anissa continued, her voice never wavering. "It reminded me of a gift my late husband gave to me. A treasure." From her apron pocket she retrieved the small, worn square of paper. With gentle fingers she unfolded it. It was no longer a discarded note, it was a sacred text. She held it out not for him to take, but for him to see. And then, in a voice that was both strong and musical, she recited the 3 short lines that would change everything. "Furu Aikya / Kawazu Tabikamu / Mizu no Odo." The lobby, with its quiet bustle of guests and staff, seemed to fall completely silent. The manager froze mid-step. A few of Davies' junior executives, who had been lingering by the door, turned to stare, their mouths slightly agape. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the gravity of the moment. Literal goosebumps when she spoke. Mr. Tanaka's eyes were fixed on Anissa. As she finished the last line, a single tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his weathered cheek. His carefully constructed composure had finally broken, not by pressure or by argument, but by a poem. He reached out and gently took the paper from her, holding it as if it were a priceless artifact. He turned to his aide and then to the stunned onlookers. He spoke in English, his voice thick with an emotion that stunned the room into silence. "This is a famous poem by the master Basho." He paused, composing himself. "An old silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash, silence again." He looked around the lobby, his gaze finally settling on the pale face of the junior executive who had been with Davies. "All afternoon, I've been listening for a sign of true partnership, a sign of a shared soul. I was listening for the splash in the silent pond." He looked down at the poem, then back at Anissa, his eyes full of a gratitude that was deeper than words. "This," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "is the splash." He turned back to the executive. "Tell your company we will have a deal, but it will not be Mr. Davies' deal, it will be a new one. We will build it on a foundation of this." He held up the poem. "This is Shingon." The power dynamic of the entire affair had not just shifted, it had been completely reborn. The quiet waitress had just become the most powerful person in the room. The fallout was swift and decisive. Mr. Davies was unceremoniously removed from the project, his brand of bulldozer diplomacy now seen as a massive liability. The news of his ousting sent a quiet shockwave through his company. The deal was renegotiated from the ground up, built not on aggression, but on the principles of partnership and mutual respect that Mr. Tanaka had insisted upon from the beginning. A few days later, Anasa received a formal invitation to meet with Mr. Tanaka and the new leadership team for the joint venture. They met not in the restaurant, but in a serene, light-filled office overlooking the city. They offered her a lucrative position as a community liaison, a role created specifically for her. This was her moment for victory, for reward, for justice. But Anasa's idea of justice was different. What does real justice look like here? She politely declined the corporate job. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm and firm. "That is a great honor, but my place is not in an office." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "What happened in that room, the disrespect, it was not just about me. It is a symptom of a larger problem. People in my position are trained to be invisible. We are not seen as whole people with histories, with knowledge, with treasures in our pockets." She looked directly at the new CEO, a woman who had replaced Davies. "I don't want a job. I want a change. I ask that you partner with the hotel group to create a mandatory training program for all staff, from the buzzboys to the senior managers. A program on cross-cultural communication, on empathy, on the dignity of service, so that no guest ever feels so powerful they can dismiss another human being, and no staff member ever has to endure being made to feel like scribbles." It was a stunning request. She had been handed the keys to a new life and had chosen instead to unlock a door for everyone else. Sometimes justice arrives without applause. Her choice was not about personal gain, but about systemic change. The executives in the room exchanged surprised glances, their respect for her deepening with every quiet word she spoke. The company, under its new leadership, and guided by Mr. Tanaka's profound respect for Anasa, wholeheartedly agreed. They saw the brilliance in her request. It wasn't a punishment for the past, but an investment in a better future. They formally partnered with the hotel group where Anasa worked. Together, they designed and funded a new, comprehensive training initiative. It was given a formal name, the Basho Protocol. The name itself was a tribute, embedding the story of its origin into the very fabric of the institution. The protocol was specific and robust. It wasn't a vague, one-off seminar. It was a multi-module curriculum that became a mandatory part of employee onboarding and annual review. The policy had 3 core components: cultural acuity training, led by outside experts. This module taught staff about the specific cultural nuances of the hotel's international clientele, focusing on communication styles, gestures of respect, and social etiquette. Dignity and service workshops. These were interactive sessions where staff could share experiences and learn de-escalation techniques for handling disrespectful guests, with clear protocols for seeking management support without fear of reprisal. The Hidden Talents Initiative. A new, voluntary section was added to employee files where staff could list skills, languages, or expertise outside their job description, a direct response to Anasa's own hidden knowledge. Anasa was asked to consult on the curriculum's design, and she agreed. The change was real, it was named, and it had a clear enforcement path through HR. Resistance from some old guard managers didn't vanish overnight, but the path forward was now clear, and it had been paved by the quiet waitress they had once overlooked. Would this change be enough in your workplace? Days after the new protocol was announced, Anasa was at home. Her small apartment was a sanctuary of calm, filled with simple, elegant furniture and a few beautiful pieces of Japanese art that had belonged to Kenji. The evening sun cast long shadows across the floor. On a small, low table in the corner, a single photo of her late husband sat in a plain wooden frame. He was smiling, his eyes kind and full of light. Beside the photo lay the haiku. It was no longer folded into a tight square but had been carefully pressed flat under a heavy book. Its creases were still visible, like faint scars, but the paper was smooth now, resting in the gentle light. For so many years, that poem had been a private symbol of her grief, a secret touchstone to a life that had been taken from her. She had carried it as a piece of her heart, hidden away from a world that wouldn't understand. But now, its meaning had transformed. By bringing it into the light, by speaking its words aloud in a moment of crisis, she had done more than save a deal. She had allowed Kenji's spirit of quiet strength to re-enter the world and do its work. She had honored his memory not by hiding it, but by sharing it. She gently traced the calligraphy with her finger. A sense of profound peace, deeper than any she had felt in years, settled over her. She had reclaimed her own narrative. Her dignity, which had been so casually trampled upon, was now whole again, restored not by an apology from a man who would never understand, but by her own quiet courage. She had finally defined herself, not as the world saw her, but as she truly was. A week later, a flat, rectangular package arrived by courier. It was wrapped in simple brown paper with no return address, but Anissa knew instantly who it was from. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was not a check or a gift card, but something far more meaningful. It was a first edition, leather-bound collection of the poetry of Matsuo Basho, the master who had written her haiku. The book was old, the pages thick and fragrant with the scent of time. It was an object of quiet, profound beauty. Tucked into the first page was a handwritten note on a piece of thick, cream-colored cardstock. The calligraphy was as elegant and deliberate as the man who had written it. The note read, "Anissa-san, thank you for reminding a foolish old man what the sound of water truly means. The world needs more people who know how to listen to the silence. May this bring you as much peace as your words brought to me. With deepest respect, Tanaka." This was recognition done right. It wasn't a public award or a flashy promotion. It was a quiet, personal acknowledgement of her wisdom, her character, her soul. It was a gift that said, "I see you. I understand you." It was a shared moment of respect between two people who understood the power of stillness. For Anissa, this quiet gesture of recognition was more valuable than any corporate title or monetary reward. It was a door opening not just for her, but for a way of being in the world that she had fought so quietly to protect. 6 months later, Anissa stood at the front of a classroom in the hotel's training center. Before her sat a group of new hires, young, eager faces from all over the world. She was leading her first session of the Basho protocol. In her hand, she held the haiku. It was now carefully preserved, sealed in a clear laminate sleeve. The worn, yellowed paper with its elegant, flowing script was no longer a fragile secret. It had become a tool, a symbol, a lesson. She held it up for the class to see. "This piece of paper," she began, her voice calm and resonant, "was once called scribbles. It was thrown on a table because the person looking at it did not understand its language. He saw only what he did not know, and he feared it." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Our work here is not just to serve food or clean rooms. It is to see the person. It is to understand the language behind the words. Every guest who walks through our doors carries a treasure in their pocket. It might not be a poem. It might be a worry, a hope, a memory. Our job is to create a space where that treasure is safe." The poem's meaning had been utterly transformed. Did the object's meaning change for you too? It was no longer just a personal memento of her lost love. It had evolved from a symbol of private grief into a public testament to the power of empathy. It was no longer in her pocket. It was in her hand, offered to a new generation, a quiet and constant readiness for the future she had helped to build. The final scene is one of stillness. We are in the main boardroom of the new Tanaka Davies International headquarters. The room is a masterpiece of minimalist design, all clean lines, natural light, and quiet elegance. There is no loud art, no ostentatious furniture. There is only one focal point. On the main wall behind the long, polished oak conference table hangs a single, magnificent piece of art. It is Anissa's haiku. Not the original, worn paper, but a stunningly rendered version of it, brushed onto a large silk scroll by a master calligrapher, Mr. Tanaka's personal gift to the new venture. Furu Aikya / Kawazu Tabikamu / Mizu no Odo. The 3 lines hang in the silent, powerful room, a permanent testament to the company's origin story. Below the scroll, a small, discreet brass plaque is mounted on the wall. It doesn't mention a $1 billion deal or a corporate merger. It says something else entirely. Our founding principle, listen for the splash. Tour guides and new executives are told the story of the quiet waitress who understood the meaning of a still pond. Her act of courage has become a corporate legend, a parable of how the smallest gesture can create the most profound ripple. The legacy of her dignity is now etched into the very walls of the institution she helped to create, a quiet, daily reminder of the day that true words changed everything. The room is still. The work continues. How many splashes have we failed to hear, simply because we forgot to listen?